right, I've promised you a special guest here today, and it is time to welcome in our special guest. She is Angelique Mentis. Now, Angelique is the CEO of ThatsMySpot, a business she founded specifically to solve a pain point that she was personally experiencing in the strata buildings she occupied, with unauthorized people parking in her designated parking spots 15 years ago. She is also the CEO of Parking Spots. Angelique's passion in all things parking has led her to speak at many industry conferences, and she is currently the president of the National Parking Industry Association, Parking Australia. Now, you may not have seen Angelique here in person before, but she's definitely been a past guest on the podcast. Episode number 325 is the one to head back to if you want to hear more from Angelique after today. We were talking about the solution to your painful parking problems back in that episode. Angelique was taking us through one of her innovations, that is relieving committee members from their roles as parking cops. And we were talking about how valuable parking data is and why building managers are wasting their time addressing parking problems. So in this week that we're talking about electrification, we're talking about sustainable buildings, I thought it was a great opportunity to bring Angelique Mentis to the show. I'm going to welcome her in right now. Hello, Angelique.
Hello, Amanda. How are you?
I'm doing very well. It's lovely to see you here.
And you look so lovely in pink today.
Thank you very much.
Afternoon.
It is a fun Friday afternoon. I do like to keep things fun and frolicking in Strata as best we can amidst all those challenges.
Exactly.
Now, tell us, Angelique, for those who haven't listened to our past podcast chat or come across you previously, do you want to share a little bit about your background and how it is that your business is serving strata buildings?
Sure. In any communal living situation like strata, which you all live in, there's a whole lot of different issues that come up when you're sharing assets and resources. And one of the key things that people have a really bugbear about is parking. And so many years ago, when I was living in the strata building and had triple security swipes in it, people would come down through the triple security swipes, and my parking was directly off that lift, and they decided that they would park in that nominated parking, which is really, really frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
So back then, the alternatives were go to body corporate, get approval, put a garage door in, go to council. $10,000 later, by the time you've diverted services and put a garage door in and all the approvals, then you can put a garage door in.
Yeah.
So real pain in the neck. So I'm in the city of Sydney. Then moved into another building for an office suite, and they tried to do the same thing there. But of course, the building didn't allow rules to enclose your parking space. And in this situation, it was an office building in King's Cross, and it was actually worse because there was a hotel in part of the building as well. So it was a mixed use building. So it wasn't just the people that lived there that were parking in the spot. It was itinerant guests that were coming to the hotel.
Mm.
And there was just absolutely nothing you could do about it. And it was just really annoying. In fact, you pay so much for parking in the city of Sydney. And when you buy a property or you rent it, you're putting a huge amount of investment in that. So you expect to be able to use it, apart from the stress it causes you. So whether it's commercial or residential strata, the problem is still there. So that sort of set me off on a path and a mission to find a solution which would make it easy and seamless. And I knew that my parking spot was there because I was paying for it and I deserved to be able to use it. So that's when I started ThatsMySpot out of personal need and experience. And I've been running that for the last 15 years because there's a lot of other people that have that problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so we try and solve it with a really simple solution. So we have these bollards that start with very basic manual bollards for people on a budget, that go through to remote control, that go through smart bollards that work off a smartphone. And now my new venture in parking spots, we are networking them in to connect to building management systems. So you can automate the entire process. You can watch you can ensure that only authorised people are actually accessing those parking spots. You can put limited time zones on them for availability. You can segment them off to EV charging spaces versus disabled bays. And it makes the building far more efficient and optimizes turnover. And in some instances, if the building rules permit it, you can actually probably generate some revenue out of it as well.
Mm. Now, I know
thing to reduce the costs for Strata, right?
Absolutely. And I know in our podcast episode that we recorded, I think it's probably about close to a year ago now, we go
Okay.
into some detail about how that system works. And something that I was really excited about was the ability to have these remote control bollards in a visitor parking area. And then for residents to book those spots when they've got a visitor coming, and they can give them a code, and then the spot becomes automatically accessible to that visitor when they turn up. And I just went, mind blown. That's awesome.
So that's exciting. And out of that, and from what you're talking about with Brent this week as well, one
Mm,
of the particular areas that is, deeper on that is especially around EV charging.
yep.
So the use case that's become very evident, and everybody on these Facebook groups, I don't know if many of you've seen Facebook groups called ice holes and EV holes, right? So where people are
Sorry. You
ice
said
holes,
ice holes.
ice
Ice.
holes
Okay.
and EV holes. Um, so is that okay to say? I should have
No,
asked that.
go for it. I just was just clarifying. You're going to tell us what
Ice
all
holes
this
and EV
means.
holes. And what this is when you've got designated EV charging bays, when you have people in a petrol or a diesel vehicle, which is properly known as an internal combustion engine, so ICE
I see.
vehicle,
Got it.
they
Yep.
go, they can't find any parking, so they'll go and park in that spot. And by doing so, they ice it, which means a person with an electric vehicle who wants to use it for charging is blocked from charging. So that's
Right.
become a big phenomenon, and there are Facebook groups that rant about it, and it's pretty much not fair. It's sort of, again, another use of parking in a way that's not by authorised people for the purposes it should.
Hmm.
And so, again, frustration, challenges, policing that, like building managers are trying to police parking. I interviewed about 80 building facilities managers in large strata buildings, about 80 of them, and they on average spend about 12 to 15% of their time in their day job chasing
Mm,
and following up parking problems,
I believe
which
it.
is and that's a big expense, right? If you could reduce the cost of, well, they could be doing a whole lot of other things. Building managers and facilities managers do a whole lot of other things. So that wasted time, if you can automate that process and put something in to stop the pain point happening rather than having someone chase afterwards, and the stress around it as well. I
Mm.
mean, we're living together in a communal environment. So you actually really want to prevent that. It saves them a huge amount of time and the stress, and the whole building flows a lot more seamlessly.
So you're in these Facebook groups reading about these ice holes. And are you seeing specific discussions about these in residential strata buildings, or is it mostly sort of the commercial public spaces at the moment? And where,
Interesting. Interesting.
yeah,
So in my role as president of Parking Australia as well, we work very closely with the EV Council. And you would have seen that there's a lot of fines being implemented now for parking in EV charging bays. The thing is, those fines are not enforceable in private property
yeah,
unless you've gone and engaged council under a
yeah,
contract to police it and walk around. And that's the only time they're really enforceable. So
yeah.
that's a real pain point. You can't really, you can have these $3,000 fines, but A, you've got to catch the person in the act. B, you've got to pay somebody to police it all the time. And thirdly, it's not even enforceable in private property at the moment. So
Mm,
that's a real pain. We've even with parking operators. So our parking bollards sit in Wilson Parking's EV charging bays now, right?
mhm.
Because they want to reserve those bays for people that need to charge, not just
Yep.
to park. We see it in shopping centres. We see it in residential strata as well. But the fine issue is a big one. It's very hard to
Yeah.
actually enforce a penalty or an infringement notice on private property like that.
Yeah, impossible. And you're right. And we do have a provision in our Local Government Act where an owners corporation, being a private entity, can enter into one of these parking arrangements with council.
Mhm.
Not always suitable for every building, because that really, in my experience, only works where you've kind of got this open air parking arrangement. You don't have secure basement access. It kind of only deals with the public who might be parking in an easily accessible spot. It doesn't deal with the visitor for your next door neighbor parking in your spot for 2 days, or people who are visiting residents who are tenants abusing the visitor parking spaces. So what I think I'm hearing for the first time here, Angelique, is that we're adding with EVs, the rise of EVs, and doing all good things in our buildings, having dedicated EV charging stations and spaces, we're adding another layer to this parking problem where, we might have bylaws that deal with visitor parking and what happens when someone's abusing the visitor parking, but we're going to have to add to that now, unless we deal with it in a more creative way, add to that now, how do we deal with people illegally parking in the EV charging spot?
Yeah. And, there's a whole lot of different ways, and Brent touched on these, whether there's communal EV charging bays, whether people have their own individual ones. So much depends on load management. So much depends on CapEx that you need to do, especially for existing buildings, which need retrofitting. Strata residents have enough levies at the moment as is. It doesn't make sense to always go the biggest CapEx right now, or does it make sense to do it incrementally and see what the usage is and the turnaround, and optimizing those existing EV charging stations, because you don't charge your car all the time it's sitting at home.
Yeah.
I've had an EV since 2017, and I charge mine probably once or twice a week overnight.
Yeah.
So it's not, you don't need to be charging it all the time. So there's enough room for everyone to share resources, right? So I think that that's a way for getting people acclimatized to EV adoption, especially because there is a lot of debate in Strata as to whether people want to spend the money, whether they want electric vehicles in their building. But if you don't put them in, you're going to be left behind.
That's it.
That's the big catch.
Yep. So with That's My Spot and with your bollards solution, is that something that you're now hearing from buildings who want to protect these EV charging spaces? Bollards is a solution for that one too?
They see that because then they can optimize sharing of it, and it's only people with EVs that need to charge them, use those bays at those times. So even if you've only got 2 or 3 bays for electric vehicles, you can schedule your charging around that and say there's, 50 or 100 people, if there's 10 EVs in the building, 2 bays, for everybody to have a turn charging in the city is not unrealistic.
Yeah, and people are no doubt able to charge elsewhere as well. I mean, as the owner of an EV, if you're traveling or if you're visiting a friend or if you're out for a few days, I mean, you're going to, as we do, fill up our cars with petrol in various spots. We can be charging in various spots. You're not always charging at home, I imagine.
Statistics in the US at the moment are about between 80 and 90% of EV charging is done mostly in the home. So Brent's point as to adding capital, the capital value, it is important for people when they're buying a property to know that they can plug in their vehicle, just the same way you want to know if the toilet flushes or there's electricity, right?
And that is, I love that you put it that way, because that is it, isn't it? That is where we're heading to.
Yep. It's like, do you have parking? No, not interested. Move on, right? It's exactly the same question that they're asking. It's just something that people are getting used to a little bit more.
Yeah. Have you got any buildings that you're working with that are sort of navigating any challenges around this? Any case studies that you want to share?
We've got a really large building we're working with in Mascot at the moment. I didn't actually ask her before if I could talk about it. So we do have, not just in Sydney, we are national. So we work with a lot of holiday apartments. I can talk about, we supply the Circle on Cavill, and we have been for a number of years up on the Gold Coast. They use it for holiday apartments, for example. Actually, that's another point. And look, depending on what your Strata residences think about Airbnbs, to allow people to be able to access parking that's attached to an apartment that may be Airbnb'd or Airbnbable. That's another use case there. Holiday apartments, office suites, a lot of office suites in terms of now with flexible working hours and making sure that everybody can have a turn of the parking spot that they need on different days. So rostering that is really important. So it's both sharing visitor parking bays and ensuring that your own parking spot is secured.
Yeah.
People can't overflow into yours.
And when you talk about securing your own parking spot, I imagine if you have these smart bollards, it's as simple as you have an app on your phone or something, and there's a code and the bollard goes up and then you're coming in and the bollard goes down.
Yep. So you can, with your own phone, it's like a remote control fob, but you use your phone as a remote control fob. And then if you want to share it with family and friends, you can enable sharing access so they can use it with their phone. You don't even have to be there with your phone.
Are you the only one doing this in Australia?
I'd like to think so, but we have been doing this for 15 years now, just solving the problem. And I think what we find is when you stop and listen to people's needs, then you get the next iteration, which is why we've built the next product. So, I mean, for example, we've done a lot with for Meriton. A lot of their residential apartment suites, their visitor parking bays are always a challenge, and they're often in mixed commercial use buildings, right? So they've got shopping centres attached as well. So there it becomes even more of a challenge. And the bigger the building, the bigger the challenge, the bigger the time. CCTV cameras, you can't spend hours poring over footage all the time.
No, no. As much as the lawyers would want you to.
Yeah, and you want to avoid those fisticuffs in the basement, right? Like when people
Oh,
come out
God.
and everybody gets really hot and bothered, and yeah,
Do you
it's
know
an
what? That is an issue with parking, and it happens in my building where we have a few resident owners who have been committee members in the past, and they happen to live in the apartments that are front facing towards the visitor parking, and so they kind of took on the role as parking cop in the absence of a building manager, and they have little stickers and notices that they put on the cars that they know shouldn't be there, and every few months or so, it gets to the point where these poor residents say, we don't want to do this anymore. We don't want to be the bad guy. We don't want to be the ones getting sprayed with abuse, because that is the situation that it is. You can say, someone like me as a lawyer can say, oh, well, go and knock on the door. Oh, well, put a notice on the car. But people don't want to be doing that when they're at
and
home.
then
So whatever you can put in place to avoid that, I think is
and
good.
police won't do anything. They can't. It's
No.
on private property.
Yeah.
And then in terms of towing, I mean, there's notices under the New South Wales strata law. Correct me if I'm wrong here, Amanda. You are the expert. But if there's a vehicle parked over on common property for an excessive period of time, or there's an asset on it, you have the right to remove that vehicle to another area of common property. But you've got to put a notice on that car for 7 days?
Well, I'm going to stop you there because that used to be the law.
Oh,
You're
is it
right.
changed? Right.
It was repealed. It was very quietly, very secretly, no consultation whatsoever,
Wow.
repealed. And we no longer have those sections in our legislation. What we have to do, like everybody else who ends up with abandoned goods on private property, we have to follow the provisions that are in the Uncollected Goods Act, which
Wow.
is a much more involved procedure when you're talking about something as valuable as a car. So you really don't have that option anymore of being
Yeah.
able to touch a vehicle at all that is on the common property and shouldn't be there.
And
It's no good.
even if you did have the rights to tow it, the problem is most tow trucks can't get down into an underground
Yeah.
parking basement and hoist the car up. I mean, it's
Yeah.
gonna, damage water sprinklers and stuff like that. It's just not viable.
Yeah,
Just
absolutely.
not
I'm just going to head into these comments. And if you are here tuning in, I can see lots of you there live. If you've got a question for Angelique about a parking problem, about her solution, about EVs and EV charging, she is the expert. Angelique and I have spent a little bit of personal time together doing the Bondi to Bronte walk a couple of times. And we talk about EVs and EV charging. And she is a wealth of information. So if your community is thinking about some of these options, feel free to post a question here for Angelique. Henry is saying, hi, Amanda and Ms. Mentis. The key is to have all new developments install a 3-phase 32 amp socket to all car park spots, which is metered. This allows for each resident to automatically connect an EV charger. Retrofitting depends on power capacity to the building. Interesting. Is that a solution that you've heard about, Angelique?
The National Construction Code in October last year was amended to require all new strata buildings to have provision for electric vehicle charging in not only one, but all across 100% of bays. Okay. For all new buildings, that's great. And that makes sense because it's much cheaper for a developer to do it at that point of time. The issues that you do need to balance with that is if you do put an EV charger in every single bay, how much power is actually being drawn at the time? Are you going to hit the building's load management capacity? If you're in, for example, Alexandria or Mascot, where there's all those massive complexes, if every single person plugged in an EV at the same time, what happens there, right? Do you get a brownout? Are the load managements working? So they do need to be metered circuit boards. So Henry is actually right, but that doesn't really help the existing buildings right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And I can see Henry there saying the retrofitting depends on the power capacity. And I can imagine it would be a significant upgrade if you're fitting everybody.
It
Yeah.
can do. And there's what we call within the building envelope and outside the building envelope. And if you can manage to make all your changes within your title on your block of land, it's going to be much cheaper, much more manageable than if you have to go and negotiate with Energy Australia or somebody else and you have to make a change outside your land lot, which is what we say outside the building envelope. So it's really important to get proper consultants in at the beginning to help guide you and to really work out and survey your residents who is going to get an EV, over what period of time, what usage are they going to have, how often are they going to charge at home. So that initial resident discovery process through surveys is really important to help formulate the best strategy for each building.
And this mapping that Brent spoke about on the podcast this week, Angelique, I imagine if you're a building that's, just wading into the waters of EV, having a look at those maps and seeing which buildings around you, especially if you're in a high density area, already have EV charging and understanding how they went about it, how it's impacting their power capacity. I mean, it can be as easy as having a knock on the door or going into that foyer, if you can get in and have a look at the notice board and see who the strata manager is or who the secretary is, and being able to drop them an email.
That's a great suggestion. So that's for sort of private charges, I guess. There is a public charging website called PlugShare, so you can see all public charges, and that's been around for some time. That was, I think, the EV Council put that together. But any public charging, whether it's a Tesla charger or a Jet Charge charger, or whatever they are, most charging companies will put their charges on PlugShare where the public have access to them. So that's also another really good resource.
That's great. We might just get that URL and pop it into the comments here. PlugShare. Mina will be able to find that one for us. Henry's also asking, what about EV chargers to car stackers? You think of it all, don't you, Henry? I have no idea.
I have actually installed a couple of car stackers.
Right. Okay.
I think what you would have, and one of them actually collapsed at one time.
Oh dear.
I would be very cautious in the beginning, personally. I'm not a car stacker expert, on how you would wire that for charging at that point of time. I'm sure some of the more companies rather than the Chinese ones would probably be a bit more reliable in terms of what they have provisioned. But if they've built in options to put chargers on the stackers, and they pass Australian safety and fire laws, yes, I guess that's an option. I have not seen one personally on a car stacker.
No. You've just mentioned fire there, Angelique. Do you have any thoughts about?
I do. I have so many.
You know what I'm going to ask you? Go for it. Let us have them.
All right. I'm going to be really blunt here. There is so much misinformation going around about EV fires. Okay. The expert on EV fires and EV charging fires is a lovely dear friend of mine, and that we've used has come into Parking Australia. Did you know until June last year there'd only been ever 4 electric vehicle fires in Australia out of 393 globally since 2010. The number of EVs that actually catch fire is about 1/100th of the number of petrol and diesel vehicles that catch fires. The challenge with electric vehicles is they run very hot and longer than a regular car fire. It's called thermal runaway, and that is the concern that people have. But the fact that it's scaremongering that EVs just catch fire, the data shows completely the opposite. Completely. And if an EV is going to catch fire, it's generally because of one of two reasons. Either the car's been in an accident and the battery has been damaged. Okay, so if the battery's been damaged or crumpled, that battery should not be driving in the car still anymore. The second thing is if it's been immersed in salt water generally. So if it's been, so they're the two areas where those batteries should not be in that vehicle. The number of incidences globally where an electric vehicle has caught fire while attached to a charger is like under 10. And I think in a couple of those cases, either the electric vehicle charger was homemade and or a couple of the cars have been in accidents. So it's actually very, very low. And most EV chargers, every EV charger has a default switch so that if there is an inconsistent power current going from the vehicle to the charger, it will automatically cut off. And in fact, it's not just a software reset, that's a hard reset. So somebody needs to come down to the charger to inspect it and reset.
Right. Okay.
So there's my recommendation to you is I will get Emma available for some time for you, because she is, and she's actually a first responder herself.
Right.
And I think one of her vehicles, her first EV, was one of the vehicles in the statistic that went up in flames because she was actually responding to a fire. She was fighting a fire and she drove an EV to the fire, and the car caught alight in the fire, not because it was caught alight because it was an EV.
Yeah. Fascinating. Well,
Yeah.
thank you for giving us your opinion on that. I think it's important whenever we talk about this topic, I inevitably get comments here on the page or comments in my inbox about what about the fire risks. So
no, it's one, and I won't say we've called bullshit on it, but we've pointed it out at Parking Australia a number of times. There's a lot of good information in the marketplace, and I think it's really important to disseminate that.
Yep, for sure. Well, Angelique, how can our viewers find out more about your parking bollard solution, connect with you, get involved in your latest projects? I think even just getting on your email list and connecting on your Facebook page and your Instagram is really great for people to just stay up to date as well. Yeah.
We do a lot of education in terms of blogs. So we write a lot of content to help people in Strata, in parking, in EV charging. So if you're looking for some resources, hop on over there on our blogs. There's a lot of free information, with even disability parking. So reach out to us through our website. Call us up on our phone number. We're on LinkedIn. We're on Facebook. We're on Instagram. I'm not on Twitter. I don't have enough time. I don't know how you do it.
It's called X.
Thank you. But Elon Musk I'm obsessed with Elon Musk. So anything to do with electric vehicles and innovation and disruption and new technology, love. Big fan. So yes, we're having a chat, and I'm usually the one on the end of the phone. So you'll find me.
I love it. Well, thank you for sharing all that. We'll make sure that your URL to your website ends up in the comments here on this page. Thank you once again for giving me your time and our viewers your expertise. As I said earlier, it's podcast episode 325 if you want to hear more from Angelique. And especially in that conversation, we go deep on that bollard solution and the remote control bollards. It's definitely information that I sent over to my own Strata committee when it came out. Well, we'll get there. We're still getting there.
And actually, I'm just going to say this in case anybody has this question. They're all BCA compliant when we fit them. So they don't penetrate into the slab, which is a big issue that some people always ask. There you go.
Yeah, definitely. And thinking about, making additions to common property and what kind of approvals you might need at general meeting level, making sure that you've got that all covered off, getting it all sorted. Excellent. Thank you, Angelique Mentis. I'll let you off into your weekend and catch up with you again soon.
Great weekend. Thanks, Amanda. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.